In a new age of watchmen, a team of individuals, pooling their talents and abilities, come together to bring analysis, reaction, and comedy to the fold. This is their chronicle. This is Accounting Arc.
Good morning and welcome back to another episode of ARC. We are pretty excited today to talk about TikTok fraud. So from my understanding, in recent months, there was a fraud perpetuated against Chase Bank. And this fraud, in these TikTok videos, people were showing, hey, I could write a check, I could deposit it in an ATM and then withdraw the funds. Now, normally, about $225 is available for withdrawal immediately after depositing a check, and that's a general limit for access to funds that the government has put on banks. For some reason, Chase's algorithm was allowing people to withdraw more than that from the checks that they were depositing, and in some cases up to the full amount, in other cases a percentage of it. So my guess is that their algorithm was looking at the account and saying, is this a fraud risk? Has any activity been, interesting or weird? Do they have a lot of check activity? And if the answer is no, then they're probably just letting people take it. And so this quote unquote glitch in the matrix, or whatever it was proposed on TikTok, came to light, where all of these TikTokers were saying free money, deposit a check written to yourself and then immediately withdraw the cash. Well, what they didn't realize is that they were perpetrating a fraud. So let's get into it, guys. What are your thoughts about check fraud today?
Well, and I just realized a detail in there that I imagine the fraudsters didn't explain clearly, because say you had $1,000 in your bank account and you deposit a $500 check, you can then withdraw a full $500 because it's coming from your balance. So the only way that would work is your balance would actually have to be less than the check amount that you were depositing. Otherwise, you were just taking your own money and then the check was bouncing and there was absolutely no implication to it. So
let's say you had a TikToker who had a $500 bank balance and they deposited a check for $5,000 and then they're withdrawing $4,000 of it immediately.
Right. Yeah.
So what's going to happen in 3 days, Byron?
In 3 days, it's going to bounce. There's going to be now a negative $4,000 balance, or $3,500 balance in their bank account.
Thank you for being a pedantic accountant.
and the bank is probably going to call their phone, which they're not going to answer, and leave a voicemail that says, please call Chase Bank to discuss your account as soon as possible.
You're also going to get a text message that says there was likely fraud on your account. We need to talk. But it's not going to say,
they'll probably lock the account as well.
Your account.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And what's the other ramification of this? Fines, penalties, potential arrest.
Right. I mean, you took $4,000 from the bank, and the bank is going to want that back. Yes. So you've stolen money. Basically, I mean, there was a whole movie basically about this hack, right? Like Catch Me If You Can, the story, Frank Abagnale, where he was just making fake checks and depositing them at banks and taking back when we didn't have computers, and there was like probably a 10-day wait while they were mailing checks around. So it's kind of funny that even TikTok and social media is marketing this as like a big aha moment, when it's really just kind of bringing forward check writing scams that have been around for many, many years.
That was the thing that tripped me out, because I was like, wait, one, it was like checks. Like, who does checks? I actually had to fight.
Where did they get checks?
Right. I had to actually fight. The last account I opened, I had to fight the bank practically to be like, do not issue me checks. I won't use them. No, don't charge me for them because they charge for them too, right? I was like, no, I really don't need this. I do everything online.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So now you need a tutorial of how to order checks and then how to fill them out properly, right? I had that conversation with my 22-year-old recently. I showed her a check and asked her if she knew what to put on each line, and she got the date and the signature right. But I think the big thing she got wrong is she didn't write, well, first of all, she doesn't write in cursive. And second, she didn't know to like spell out the numbers on the line. She just put it a second time. So now you need a tutorial on how to order checks, a tutorial on how to write checks before you can even begin this scam.
But the interesting
Fun
thing
fact,
was,
I cannot write in cursive either.
Oh, really?
Long story. Cannot do it.
Oh my God.
Okay. Donnie, you're actually relevant.
That's for
comment.
drinks, Liz. Story for drinks.
The final thing was, I mean, we kind of said it. Like, so where did these people get the checks? I guess they knew how to write them, so we've got that piece in there. But I was also kind of thinking, like, how do they not realize that there's an endpoint here? It eventually gets, I mean, you deposit, what, maybe they've never bounced a check before, or?
I don't think they've ever used a check before.
I mean, well, and I think it also goes to just the lack of understanding of financial systems and banks in general. My fiance had a client recently who is running a business, has a business that grossed $500,000 last year, and he asked her, how does one go about paying off their credit cards, because he's never been educated on that. And I mean, I guess it's not his fault, but it's not being taught. Like, so this idea of banks and how they work and how interest is earned on your accounts and how you're borrowing money from banks and like all of those inner workings, there's just such a lack of understanding that I think it's people think about banks like they do cars. They have no idea how an internal combustion engine gets them from A to B. So why should they worry about how money goes in and out of a bank, I guess? I don't know.
Is that true?
That people don't
Sorry,
understand
that
how
just
cars
blew my
work?
mind. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
There are many
so-
people, right?
Huh. Okay, so I have a problem. My problem being I need to understand the things that I use from like a foundational level. And like
Sure.
I want to understand all of the technology that I use, including like the way AI is programmed before I use it, right? I want to understand banking institutions. Like I want to understand credit cards. Like I want to understand how a car works or an airplane works. Like how am I staying in the sky? Like that seems like relevant information before stepping foot into this thing, right? So do
I said
people
last
just walk around
weekend,
trusting the systems?
no, they believe in magic. They
Oh,
just believe
okay.
in magic.
I
Yep.
have a magic wand.
Yeah, that's it. There's the expression ignorance is bliss. It truly is, and I think
I
there's a lot
completely
of people
disagree.
who
Ignorance is like terribly anxiety driven for me.
that for people who want to understand. For people who don't want to understand, they are perfectly happy not understanding, and they get all their
Okay, all right.
information from
Well,
Then I'm a
TikTok. And
witch.
I'm trying to put myself back in the situation, and I'm thinking high school was probably the first time I had exposure to that. My parents were good about actually it was even before high school, I guess. We opened the savings account. They had the passbook, that's how old I am, where they actually you carried that little book, right? And they
Yep.
would stick it in the printer and print the line on
Yes.
it that said,
Oh my
yes,
God,
you
those
made the
too.
deposit. So I feel like we got that early on, but I don't know that I always felt like I was giving them money, they were holding it, they would give me interest, and that was kind of the basic of it. Credit cards, I'm trying to think of my first credit card. I feel like my first credit card was probably my senior year in high school. And it was
Same.
because I was going to go to college, and so my parents were like, you need to build credit and you need a way just in case something happens, right? But even that, I was like, okay, yeah, I put the money here, and then eventually I got to pay it back. So I think that basic understanding was enough. Okay, granted, in high school, I did accounting. courses at my sophomore year in high school, my first
Of
one.
course you
So I
did.
did understand a little more of that, but I don't know that
Mhm.
I actually understood the banking system. Just in defense of these other people.
In,
Well,
in defense of people
yeah,
taking, fraud advice from TikTok.
and that's totally fair. Like I mean, I don't think these people are dumb. I just don't think they haven't been educated on it. And I think there's a lot of gaps because I think there's a lot of parents who don't spend the time teaching their kids about these things. I think maybe they assume school is going to teach them, and school is focused on a different curriculum.
I mean,
And
we
so
are
it
all
just
old
doesn't
enough to
happen.
be parents and know, and like, two of us are, but also we know parents in our age group that don't know these things to even teach their kids. And then
Right.
secondarily, there's a whole class of people socioeconomically that just don't have time.
Right.
Like, if you're working two jobs, what are you going to do? Like, you show
Mm.
up, you make sure the kid is fed, like, you try to help them with
Yep.
their homework, you like read a book, get them to bed, and then
Absolutely.
you're going back to another job. So, like, how are you going to have time for like education of money and banking and checks?
Yeah.
Because is it relevant to the future?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting. So, my youngest daughter is a Division I athlete, and they actually get education around now with the NIL money coming in for college athletes and various things. They're actually beginning to increase the amount of financial literacy education to the athletes. So you have to be an athlete in college to get it, but they're beginning to realize that, oh, these kids who are even starting to make money as athletes in college should probably be taught. And I've heard of in the past, like the NBA, the NFL, like, the baseball also doing education
The
for,
baseball, MLB.
the baseball. Thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome.
The baseball. Um, eh, yeah. So, so like there's places where people are recognizing a need, but the general public needs it as well. And it's such a struggle. And actually going back, Liz, to your point about parents who may not either have the time or even the knowledge to teach them, that also goes for social media. So it's a double, it's a 1-2 punch because I can tell you many of my daughter's parents or friends' parents had gave their kids zero guidance on social media, how to evaluate whether or not information they learn is safe, accurate, or anything, and then how to behave with that information. So you now have a lack of education around social media and like facts and trends and combined with lack of understanding of financial literacy. I mean, it's really the perfect opportunity to create a check writing trend on TikTok.
So
Yep.
where did the where did where does the financial literacy come in? Because I'm trying to think back to school. I know, I think it was seventh or eighth grade. We had to learn, we
Home
had
ec.
home ec, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like I feel like financial literacy, I feel like that was high school, maybe early high school.
So do you mean like where should it be taught or where is it being taught?
Maybe both. But like, I feel like it should be somewhere over there with the rest of those life skills.
I think it should be taught in middle school. I think middle school kids are old
Yep.
enough to transact. A
Yep.
lot of them are staying at home. If they can order themselves a pizza, they should be able to figure out how to deposit money in a bank without committing fraud. Um, basic skills, I think and I also think that we as a society tend to withhold information from younger children, thinking like, oh, they're not ready. They don't need to know this. This isn't important in this moment, but
Yep.
they are ready. Most of them will surprise you with what they're capable of at much younger ages than the societal norm.
Yep.
And, it's not like a bad thing for them to understand these things and get used to it and have the ability to ask questions for years before they're out of the house. Like if you teach this to a 17-year-old and they leave the next year, they don't have the opportunity to really put it in practice and like ask the questions and figure it out. It's just, okay, this is something that I high level surface have exposure to and no real experience with and no support system for when I leave the
Right.
house because 18-year-olds don't ask for help.
Well, and for what it's worth, I mean, at when we were, let's say, 8 years old, there was probably like a few times where we bought candy at like the drugstore or something like that. But I guarantee you, almost every 8-year-old in the country at this point has bought stuff online, has used like some sort of electronic currency transaction. So, I mean, to your point, it's not only are they ready for it, but I guarantee you that most very young children are making financial transactions on a regular basis, given
Yeah.
the ability to do it today.
Yeah, and so like my son is, he'll turn 8 next month. So he has an iPad and he plays, little kid fun games and he
Oh,
has some learning games as well, but it's hooked up to my account. So if he wants to buy something, it has to come to me for approval. And then we have a conversation about like, is it worth the $2 that you want to spend on this?
yep.
And like, what does that mean? What does that equate to in your labor? Like if you come and you say, I want to do chores, like how many chores are you going to have to do? Is it yard work you're going to do? Is it loading the dishwasher? Like what are we going to do to make up for this, right? And explain like the economics of what that looks like. But of course, like I have the education and the time and the thought behind it to ensure that this kid is going to know more about money and banking and accounting and the value of your time and all of those things than most children will ever learn. But he's 8, he buys things online all the time. And then of course he like tries really hard to put stuff into the Amazon cart when I'm not looking, like toys, but most of the time I catch him. Occasionally he gets a surprise present, but it's normally Pokemon cards.
Well, and there's just so many challenges. So, we're talking a lot about financial literacy and, combating some of this stuff through education that is very important and very critical and practical in my opinion. But, I think there's also the challenge of just social media also perpetuating so much bad information. As we see it all the time in the accounting profession, the number of, people coming up with these ridiculous tax evasion schemes and ideas that will go viral. And it's really leading people to make a lot of really bad decisions that they're implementing on their own because they saw a TikTok or an Instagram reel where somebody recommended, create a LLC and add the S corp and employ your kids through the S corp, and they show up at the end of the year and hopefully talk to a tax accountant who like, I'm gonna have to charge you a lot of money to dismantle this ridiculous scheme you created. It's pretty bad.
There's also a piece of constitutional law that I believe most people are ignorant to, which is we do have the First Amendment, which is freedom to speech. However, freedom to speech does not protect inciting fraud. It does not protect inciting violence. And there are a bunch of other caveats to freedom of speech, but in this particular case, inciting fraud is not protected under the First Amendment. So if you are on TikTok and you are perpetuating check fraud or you are perpetuating tax evasion or some other kind of fraud, you are not protected. And in fact, you are committing a crime in which you can be prosecuted for, even if you yourself do not perpetuate the fraud. If somebody else perpetuates the fraud that you have incited through your speech, you are liable for that.
Which I love, but is that really being enforced at any level of magnitude? I mean, I don't know, but my assumption is very little accountability to anybody who's doing this, just due to the sheer volume of what you see and um, the platforms whose algorithms are promoting it purely and perpetuating it because of the engagement with that information. Like they have virtually zero accountability at this moment.
I don't disagree with you. However, I think if you're inciting a big enough fraud and it goes viral enough, there will be consequences. And
I
it might
hope.
take a few years and it might not show up in the way that you expect or in a public, display when it also goes viral. But I do think that there are more people being held accountable for the things that they're saying. And on top of it, Congress is actually holding social media platforms accountable for spreading false information. And they have imposed many hefty fines on what that looks like and how they need to regulate this and ensure that, while freedom of speech needs to be protected, so does freedom from bad information.
Yeah.
Yeah, this one I
Go ahead,
struggled
Tony.
with quite a bit. Because part of me was, as Byron has indicated, even Liz, this is maybe this is maybe something that a lot of these people just didn't know better, right? They didn't know better, whether it's for education, the lack of the parents' oversight, whatever the case, that there was that. But they still committed a crime. And as Liz is saying, they are inciting the committing of crime, which is an interesting one. So the question becomes, does Chase actually go after them? Is the government going to go after them for that? But the whole platform for social media is an interesting one too. I was just reading an article about how a couple who was in an Uber in an accident in an Uber is trying to sue Uber, but they didn't realize that when they agreed in Uber Eats to the terms and conditions, that it actually they accepted an arbitration only clause that Uber had built into the terms and conditions for the ride sharing side, and it became, well, interesting. So is Uber really at fault, because it was really the driver who's an independent contractor who's actually providing the service and had the accident, not the platform itself. And so if they're really just a platform, are they really liable?
Yeah. A bunch of lawyers that need to figure it out. Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. And I also recently heard that Zuckerberg has actually backpedaled on a bunch of information recently with respect to his willingness to collaborate with the government with respect to things. So he came out publicly and basically said, like, in the past, the government has asked, Meta to take things down, to Meta to share certain information, and he basically said, going forward, that's going to change. They're not willing to do what they are calling censorship based on government requests, and they're also not willing to collaborate with government organizations on, various things that might want to be investigated. And then we've also seen changes with Twitter, recently with respect to their willingness to take down information and continue to adjust the algorithm to promote things that are false or fake information. So it's really, I think, going to get worse before it gets better.
I agree with you. I think it will get worse before it gets better. And also, we don't have the technology today and the resources at the government level to like look for everything and police this in the way that it probably needs to be policed. But that technology is quickly emerging. And, while our government
Yeah.
tends to be a little slow on the uptake, I do think it'll be here in the next few years. And so I'm going to circle back to like the problem at hand, which is, these check frauds. It was a check kiting scheme, effectively just perpetuated through ATMs. In some states, the felony amount of check kiting is only $2,500.
Oh,
So many of these people committed a felony.
There you
Now,
go.
whether Chase prosecutes or not probably depends on if these people pay the money back immediately or not. And in a lot of cases, if they pay it back immediately, Chase probably won't prosecute and will say, like, hey, as the victim, I choose not to prosecute this. But in other cases, people took a whole bunch of money and spent it that they don't have, and it is a felony charge. And I believe there will be prosecutions coming out of this. I do not think it will just idly sit by. Now, for the people who are perpetuating it, that's yet to be seen. That is going to be up to the federal government to enforce a violation and a fraud incitement. And we'll see.
Yeah.
If I see it, I will follow up on our podcast and say, hey guys, here's what I know now. But it'll take a while because it's the government.
I'm creating a Google
that one. I
alert
think
for
we
it
need
right now.
the ones that are perpetuating, because that's what gives people that disincentive, right? Okay, I better think twice. Is this really something that is true, or is this really something that's fraud in the end?
Mhm. And look, there's no free money. So if you see a TikTok saying, hey, you can get free money doing this, that's a lie. And there have been many of them on TikTok. Like, I think last year there was a whole viral trend about people opening business cards and charging like $100,000 and then just closing down the business. I mean, like, well, you're no longer liable. That is not true. That is very difficult to get out from under. And now you've just created debt in a very complicated way, but it's still debt that you ultimately are responsible for. So, I think coming at it with a grain of professional skepticism is very important. And I think anybody that's listening to our podcast is likely educated enough in the financial sector to not believe that. And I would ask that you spread that news to people that might not be educated enough to, that might believe these things and talk about them and tell them why. Know your facts. And I would say if you're considering or in the accounting profession, it is part of your professional responsibility and ethical responsibility to this country, this economy, your friends and family, to be the one that can be the voice of reason around these types of financial topics.
Yeah, you went right where I was going, which I thought that this is the tie back to, this is part of our role, our profession's role in society. And the other piece of it, it's kind of mixed feelings on this one. It brings me back to the Feed the Pig initiative. You remember that?
Yep.
The financial literacy.
Absolutely. Yep.
For those of you that haven't seen that one, go Google it. You might get to see the scary images, or you might not want to, because you're going to get to see the scary images of the pig costume person that was going
It's not
around.
good. It was bad branding.
But it did win awards.
I'm not sure why.
It
Well,
did, but I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I mean, that is, I don't know for how long, but financial literacy has been an initiative of the AICPA for as long as I can remember being involved in the profession. And so there are a lot of resources that have been created over the years to help with education around financial literacy. I believe there's been initiatives to have CPAs go into schools to talk about financial literacy and some things around that. So you're absolutely right. I mean, this is kind of a cornerstone of our profession and our contribution to helping to protect the public and educate the public.
And I feel like I haven't seen any of that recently. So maybe this is our call to action, both for the AICPA and the state societies. Like, hey, this Chase fraud issue is a good example of, we got to bring this stuff back, and we need to start getting out into the schools and talking to people, talking to students and kids about this.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think fraud and how to get free money, it's always going to be way more interesting than the accounts that are debunking this stuff and talking about why this is not real and how to avoid getting yourself into trouble for being a little dumb, in my opinion. And so, it's let's promote the stuff that teaches facts. Let's help the people who are out there trying to debunk tax fraud myths. My good friend Laurelyn Wilson, follow her account, promote that stuff. Have those people that are saying, nope, this is wrong and this is why. Let's get them to go viral versus the people that are saying, like, here's a way to defraud whoever. And of course, they'll never say it in those terms, but if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Do a bit more research and be the voice of reason in the world that helps promote reality.
Well, and if you are a parent who maybe doesn't know how to approach teaching your kids about financial literacy and things, actually Intuit has an amazing amount of resources. They even have games for teaching kids financial literacy, and a whole curriculum of resources. So, definitely there's resources out there, even if you don't feel confident in, teaching it.
Excellent. Well, I think we've got actions for everybody to take. So for those of you listening, hopefully you take some of this and educate your friends, family, and or clients about financial literacy. And we'll hope to see you guys on another edition of our podcast. See you then.
And don't commit fraud.
The Center for Accounting Transformation provides business professionals with a network for utilizing innovations that are ready for adoption, the training and resources necessary to apply those innovations, and an opportunity to engage the talent and community needed to further the pursuit of innovative accounting practices that drive responsible and mindful business performance. Find out more at our website, www.improvetheworld.net. And if you're interested in sharing your own transformation stories, please contact us there.